graduate program in theology, the most likely to pursue a career working for the church as a layperson in either a full or part-time capacity. In other words, folks, we're talking about the leaders of tomorrow. And in that milieu, there is an evangelical energy so thick these days you could cut it with a knife, bottle it, and sell it. It is in many ways their defining generational trait. And that, of course, is because just as Vatican II was the defining ecclesial event for the older generation in the church, the papacy of John Paul II was the defining event for this younger generation and the evangelical energy that papacy unleashed. My point is that what we have today in Catholic life in our part of the world is a sort of double whammy. We have this strong evangelical momentum, this strong ferment around Catholic identity that is coming at us from the top down, and it is also percolating from the bottom up, which means that tensions and hard questions about Catholic identity are destined to be a defining feature of life in the church for the rest of our lifetimes. Okay? Those questions such as, how do we know that what you're doing is authentically Catholic? How do you define your Catholicity? How do you defend it? How do you broadcast it to the outside world? And ladies and gentlemen, believe me when I tell you, if these hard questions have not yet arrived in your neck of the woods, then my advice to you would be make sure your tray tables are in a full upright and locked position, okay? Because I guarantee you they're coming. Okay? Takeaway for Catholic Charities, I think, is stunningly obvious, which is that tensions around how you both embrace and foster an unapologetic sense of sort of traditional Catholic values and traditional Catholic practice, how you do that, at the same time you operate in a public sphere that often is not only sort of indifferent to those values and practices, but in some cases actively hostile to them, those tensions are destined to stay. And in that sense, I would suggest to you that the current dispute between the Church and the White House over insurance mandates is not a one-off case. It's not an isolated affair. It is instead a harbinger of things to come. Okay? Those sorts of church-state tensions are not going anywhere. And let me also disabuse you of the notion, if you happen to be harboring this illusion, that they will somehow be magically made to dissolve based on who wins the White House in November. Okay? Because they won't. Okay? I mean, yes, it is possible that if we have a change in administration, the mandates might get rescinded, but bear in mind, another set of lawsuits in which the U.S. bishops have recently been involved have to do with immigration legislation in states such as Alabama and Arizona, which would effectively criminalize pastoral services to undocumented persons. And those legislative measures were put in place by Republican-dominated legislatures. Okay? So the question of, unfortunately, there's no easy partisan fix to this problem. Okay? We're talking about deep movements of history which are destined to endure. The only piece of advice I can give you, therefore, is as much as possible, try to defuse the bomb before it goes off. Okay? You need to be working now at building strong relationships with both the secular authorities in your own backyard and also the ecclesial authorities in your own backyard, because I guarantee you moments of crisis are not the right time to start building relationships. It's when you cash those relationships in. Okay? I want to end with one final thought, and then we'll be done. Apropos of hope. If we are to take a hopeful position vis-a-vis the challenges that I've just tried to outline for you, and let's not have blinders on. I mean, this brave new world I've tried to describe is full of difficult new challenges, both bubbling up from inside the church and crashing in on us from the outside. If we are to be hopeful about facing those challenges, it seems to me we're going to need a whole cocktail of qualities of heart and mind. We're going to need courage. We're going to need persistence. We're going to need perspective. We're going to need vision, and so forth and so on. But here's one that I guarantee you has to be part of the mix. And if it's absent, we are lost. And that quality is a lively sense of humor. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if we cannot laugh at the challenges we face, we are going to spend all of our time wringing our hands and fighting down heartburn. Okay? And here's the good news. The good news is you can find a sense of humor in this church of ours even in the most wildly improbable places. And I want to tell you one last story to bring that point home, and then we'll be done. The story is this. Some of you may remember that April 2005 was kind of a busy time on the Vatican news beat. Huh? You remember that? We had the sort of twilight of John Paul II and then the Pope's death. You know, those unforgettable images from Rome in those days, you all remember? I mean, that just tidal wave of humanity that washed through Rome. You know, the city of Rome estimates that something like 10 million Romans showed out, and about 10 to 15 million other people from other parts of the world came through the city in those days. I mean, the stories are just amazing. You know, on CNN, we interviewed this one guy from Chicago who had heard that the Pope had died. And he was a bus driver. He had a few vacation days coming. So he packed a bag, he drove to O'Hare, okay, got on a plane and flew to Fiumicino, okay, thinking he would hop in a cab, go pay his respects to the Pope, and then bop around Rome for a few days. Not really factoring in that there were about 15 million other people who had the same idea, okay? So he tells the cab driver, I want to go to St. Peter's Square. And the guy said, I can't get you anywhere close, but I'll get you as close as I can. So with his suitcase, this guy hopped out of his cab at Castel San Angelo, which is all the way on the other side of the Via della Conciliazione. It's about a half mile from St. Peter's Square. He joined the line. He spent the next 3 days in that line, never moving. Okay? People were sharing food with him, they were sharing water, they were swapping stories, they were praying together and so on. He was having a great time. Okay, he gets to the end of the line. He finally gets his 10 or 15 fleeting seconds in front of the Pope's casket to pay his respects. By that stage, his vacation days are all up. So with his suitcase, which he's never opened, still in his hand, he gets in a cab, goes back to Fiumicino, and flies home. And he told us on air that it was the most moving experience of his life. Now, you multiply that story by 10 or 15 million times, that was the story of those days. Okay? Then, of course, we had the conclave and the white smoke and the election of the new pope and the early days in the new papacy and all of that. You know, it was one of those rare moments when the eyes of the whole world are on us, right? Now, you all are media-savvy 21st century Americans, so you know in your bones that if there is one thing as sure as night following day, it is that what will follow a major global news event is a cottage industry of Instabooks looking to cash in and all that interest, okay? And the way I know this, ladies and gentlemen, among other things, is that I participated in that cottage industry. Okay? I produced my own Instabook called The Rise of Benedict XVI. Now, most of the people writing these books weren't necessarily full-time Vatican reporters, but in the Vatican press corps, there is a tradition that when one of us writes a book about the Pope, we always inscribe a copy to him, okay? And then we give it either to his priest secretary or to his spokesperson. Now, to be honest with you, I mean, it had never entered my mind for a second that the Pope actually reads these books, okay? In my mind's eye, I had imagined a box in the basement of the Apostolic Palace, you know, where they all gather dust. But anyway, you know, when my book came out, I wrote the book in May, it came out June 1, I dutifully inscribed a copy to the new Holy Father, Benedict XVI, and I presented it to Joaquin Navarro-Valls, who was a Spanish layman who at the time was still the Vatican spokesperson. And then I promptly forgot about it, okay? Now, flash forward to August. My wife and I are back in the States on vacation, okay? Because nothing happens in Rome in August. Do you know what the Italians say about Rome in August? The only two things that move are cani e americani, dogs and Americans, okay? So there's absolutely nothing to do in Rome in August. So we're back in western Kansas visiting my 98-year-old grandma, who lives in a little western Kansas hamlet called Hill City, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is my candidate for the worst place name in America because there is no hill and there sure as hell is no city, okay? Now, it's morning out there in western Kansas. That means it's evening back in Italy. My cell phone goes off, okay, and you know how you can tell on your phone who's calling, right? So I see it's Joaquin Navarro-Valls, the Vatican spokesperson, okay? Now, I can't prove this to you empirically, but I am morally convinced this is the first time in history that a call was placed from the papal household to Graham County, Kansas. Because I can just envision no other circumstances in which such a thing might have happened. But anyway, so I answer the phone. And Joaquin says, well, John, I'm with the Holy Father on vacation. This Holy Father, Benedict, always vacations up in the Italian Alps in northern Italy someplace. They were in Velletro this year. says, I'm with the Holy Father in vacation, on vacation in Velletro, and I wanted you to know that he came down to breakfast this morning with your book in his hands, and he asked me to deliver a message to you. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, okay? But if you've just been told that the Pope has a personal reaction to something you've written about him, you might want to make sure that your seatbelt is firmly attached, huh? Because the skies might get a little bumpy. But I said, well, of course, Joaquin, I'm delighted. What's the message? Now, to get this, you need to know that my book was divided into thirds, okay? So the first third was the final days of John Paul II. The middle third was the inside story of how Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger had been elected as Pope Benedict. The last third was my projections as to where his papacy would go, okay? So Joaquin says, well, the Holy Father asked me to deliver this message. He said, please thank Herr Dr. Allen for having written this book, particularly the last third about the future of my papacy, because it has saved me the trouble of thinking about it for myself. I like to think he was kidding. Ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest on this score that we take our cues from the Pope. Look, again, let's not be in denial and let's not be naive. We need to take a clear-eyed, unflinchingly realistic look at the challenges that we face in our time, which are going to require our best efforts to break out of pre-existing models of thinking and doing business, to engage them constructively so that we rise to the occasion of these challenges rather than being steamrolled by them. But if we can do that, not with bile in our spleen, but with a twinkle in our eye, that to me seems a winning strategy for Catholic success in the 21st century, every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Okay? Thank you, God bless you, and God bless Catholic Charities USA!